Hey, I'm Matt Nichols. You're MrMaple.com, small family mail order that's been blessed to keep growing a little bit. My dad did this as a hobby. It's an interesting thing. My grandmother on my mother's side actually did this before my dad married into it. So it comes from both sides of our family. It's kind of crazy. My dad started growing Japanese maples around 72, 74, I think is his first year of actually being in business.
Yeah.
So it's 50 years this year. My brother and I kind of took what he did and then went a little bit crazy with it. I've been doing this full time since around 2008.
Yeah.
So we kind of got it from both sides of the family. My grandmother was growing seedlings of Japanese maples here in East Flat Rock in like the 1950s. So it's kind of crazy.
Well, I feel like that was like early.
Yeah. It was a lot from seed. She was actually bringing them in from Charleston. There was a friend of hers that had seeds in Charleston. It's kind of a cool, early way to find them. But we use a lot of what she brought in as rootstock. So the trees she had are basic small leaf greens. So I grew up, people would come to visit my grandmother and offer her to buy, Japanese maples she had in her grounds. And Tim and I kind of grew up, my brother and I run this business. We kind of grew up gardening in my grandmother's yard. That's kind of how we got our love for it. So.
Well, we're going to talk to Tim soon, but I wanted to just get a little bit of an overview and maybe we could just like walk through the nursery a little bit. We're here a little early. It's a little early in the season, but we're starting to see some leaf.
I'm actually excited that we have a late spring here. We've had some early springs in the past, so I'm kind of glad that we're on a real normal pace for leafing out this year. We do over 1,500 different varieties of Japanese maples. A little bit of other stuff, obviously a lot of conifers, dogwoods, ginkgos, dawn redwoods, native azaleas, a little bit of everything, but maples are kind of what we're known for at Mr. Maple.
So when you said that you took it from your dad and you went a little crazy with it, like you and your brother went a little crazy, what does that mean? Did you just expand the cultivars and varieties or what?
So yeah, a little bit of both. So my dad, like I said, he was doing this. We would sell at local tailgate markets. It was before really people started calling them tailgate markets in the South. We went to flea markets. So it would be at like the Dreamland Theater in Asheville selling Japanese maples on Saturdays, like bald and burlap ones out of our field, things like that. When I was like 4 or 5 years old. So Tim and I kind of grew up always doing a little bit of that. And then, I don't know, around 2008, Tim and I realized that we were the ones who were really crazy about it. So for Father's Day, we'd be like, hey Dad, we got you a new cultivar of Japanese maples. We bought you one, it's really cool. He's like, guys, I've got 100 now. Do I need another one? And so the kind of the hoarder collector in us eventually just continued to grow that until it became kind of a passion that we turned into a business.
And then you were mentioning too, like this is not your only location. You ended up purchasing another location?
Yeah, so just last September, really cool opportunity. Talon Buchholz is one of our mentors. And so this operation is just a retail mail order.
Okay.
So we open up about 5 times a year for open houses. But other than that, we're typically closed and we just ship out 5 days a week. So we're sending out a truck 5 days a week from here. One of our mentors very early on was Talon Buchholz, and he's in Gaston, Oregon. And we had an opportunity last year to purchase Buchholz Nursery. So it's a 25-acre farm in Gaston, and it's a lot bigger than here.
And is it more of a retail space? Like you said,
it's actually all wholesale. So
okay, all wholesale.
Kind of their market is like unique boutique garden centers for rare and interesting stuff. Talon's kind of famous in that, like, he's like the Michael Jordan of maples. Like, he's named a lot of cool stuff. So we've named a few neat things here. Talon probably has over 100 introductions of like really famous ones, like the Ghost series you might have seen, like Purple Ghost, Amber Ghost. Those are all some of his brainchild stuff. He comes up with some cool stuff.
I really wonder, so the land that we ended up acquiring in the Finger Lakes region of New York used to also be a wholesale nursery for Japanese maples and rare conifers.
Cool.
And I know he did a lot of purchasing out in the Pacific Northwest, so I wonder if that person had actually purchased. I'm assuming maybe it was the case.
At one point, he was one of the bigger wholesale operations in Oregon. It's interesting. He's got a lot of ties back to like J.D. Trees and early maples. That was kind of his mentor. So it's just a cool place. And I had no plans of getting it, and I went and visited him, and he said, here's my purchase price. My brother and I were sitting at dinner with him, and we go, we've ruined my night now because I really have to take this serious and think about this. So,
and you're like, wait, am I picking up the dinner tab or not?
Right. So a few months later, it was official, and now we have another farm in Oregon we get to go visit, which is really cool.
So, and you have like a good crew out there, you said off camera too, which is really nice. So you and your brother could actually stay here, focus on the business here as well, which has, as you said, has expanded. I mean, you have quite a bit of greenhouses. I don't know if we could maybe see just some of the plants that you have here and what you're doing.
I'm really passionate about doing this with my brother, so I don't know that I would do this if one of us was in Oregon. So people are often asking like, well, which brother is now moving, to Oregon? And that's just not how we want to do it. If I wasn't doing this with my brother, it wouldn't make sense. We hired an incredible staff out there. We kept most of the staff on. We were very blessed to be able to send one of our young horticultural minds here, Jordan Ellis, is an Oregon State grad, and he said, I'd love to be back out in Oregon. So we helped him move back out there. He's now managing our horticulture department out there. And then we brought in a great friend of mine, and Joel Johnson, who is like way overqualified than I am to run that farm. So Joel knows what he's doing. He's got things locked up, and now I get to visit when I want to instead of every day, which makes it the best case scenario for us.
It is. So. I mean, I feel like the stars really aligned, and you all were like really passionate. You had it like through your lineage and through your blood, and that passion has expanded out to other folks, and now your business is where it is, and now you have something on the West Coast and the East Coast. I'd imagine that like if you really wanted to, you could say like everybody who's ordering from the East Coast will take, and anybody who's ordering from the West Coast will take. There's so many different ways that you could parse it out, I guess, like now that you have that option.
For right now, both farms work independently of each other. Like we do pretty well with the mail order, and we try to keep prices down for everything West Coast. Like we get to negotiate with UPS and FedEx pretty regularly.
That's great.
Since our volume. And so we'll kind of get those prices down as best as possible. They've operated successfully as a wholesale farm for 45 years, so my goal is not to mess that up.
Yeah.
My goal is to let them do their thing, we'll do our thing, and I think we'll all benefit from like the relationship. So they get our cool plants first, we get their cool plants first. That way their wholesale customers get new exciting things that we have here. We get some of the new exciting things they're evaluating there, and so it kind of benefits mutually, but gosh, I don't know that I could operate mail order from both places. It'd be a lot to figure out.
It might be too much logistics, heavy in the logistics. Well, what is it about like Japanese maples? I know I don't want you to all speak totally for your brother, but what is it about Japanese maples that you really enjoy? Yeah,
well, it's just the ever-changing beauty of them. I mean, Japanese maples, really, I love me out of leaf. I think they're a 4-season plant. For everybody else, they're a 3-season plant. You get that spring splash, you get that anticipation of spring before that. So you get that, conifers, I love conifers, but you're spoiled. You don't have to wait for it, right? With Japanese maples, you got that anticipation of the spring garden. You got those first things leafing out. You're out there in the middle of the night with a flashlight, checking out the garden. I've got some leaves. You've got all that going on. The spring garden is really my favorite. That's when I love Japanese maples the most. I think you got a lot of great summer interests. There's a lot of fun summer plants. And then, of course, maples are famous for fall. They've got great fall colors. There's so many amazing gardens to go and see Japanese maples in fall color. That's really what they're most famous for. And then I like the structures even in the winter. So even out of leaf, I'll go visit Japanese maples in an arboretum out of leaf, and then I'll look at my pictures and go, oh, I didn't realize they were out of leaf. Like in my mind, I saw some foliage.
Well, yeah, when you see some of those more ancient ones, like we were just at the Biltmore, and they had some of those really ancient, gnarled, like sinewy, kind of carbuncle type bark, and it's
a lot of those older trees at Biltmore were planted by Olmsted, so kind of crazy stuff. There's some really old Japanese maples in this area that kind of came from Charleston first, and then kind of got here, and for whatever reason they're still around, like 1800s era maples. It's pretty crazy, but.
And just for people who may not be familiar with Japanese maples or say, oh, I want to actually explore that, what's the grow zone that they're optimum in?
So we kind of narrow it down. They've kind of been changing a little bit of the zones last year. We list Japanese maples as cold hardy down to zone 5. Now all the zones are really based off how cold it gets. We like to give an East Coast max zone, which is zone 8 or zone 9. So they're gonna work zones 5 through 9 on the East Coast. California breaks all those rules. So like zones 5 through 9 makes a lot of sense because once you get down past zone 9 Florida, it can get a little more tricky for the humidity.
Yeah.
Again, zones are really based off how cold it gets, not the heat index, but it's a good generalization, and it works pretty good for the East Coast. Now, when you get out in California, New Mexico, and Colorado, and some of those areas, throw all the zones out the window because the heat index matters a lot as well. I've got customers in zone 10, California, with Japanese maples in full sun. So, kind of breaks all the exceptions there. Generally zone 5. Now we have some cool, subaldianums that can go into zone 3 and 4.
Oh, that's
so there's some exceptions to the rule for sure. One thing we like to do here is kind of focus on some of the outside the box stuff. Like we have a series of pseudosubaldianums coming out that can handle colder temperatures. We like to go push it the other direction. So we have some Acer olivianum hybrids that can handle the extreme heat kind of climate. So we like to kind of give them superpowers if at all possible.
Well, I know a lot of folks will select for that as well, but it's hard because you're in the area that you are in, and like, this is going to be the coldest that you could be. You know what I mean? So to try to select for anything cold hardier is going to be challenging.
Well, what we try to do whenever we're naming something is evaluate it. We have a 5 and 7 rule here. So we like to name trees. What we'll do is we'll pick the 5 closest cultivars to it. So if we can't tell how it's better or worse than, or improvements on the 5 cultivars that are closest to it, then we don't need to introduce it.
Right.
And then we'll evaluate it for 7 years. So we'll send it to a customer in New Jersey. We'll send it to somebody in Texas. We'll send it to somebody in Oregon. And we'll say, hey, keep some notes on how this is doing.
Yeah.
And kind of let us know if this is something that we should pursue, what it's looking like each year.
Right.
And if it beats all those criteria, maybe it's worthy of introduction.
That's right. We're in zone 5, just so you know.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Those polar vortex years could be tough there. We're 6B here, but we regularly get -10. So.
Yeah. I mean, I was just sharing off camera that we had like a really beautiful cultivar that we got at our friend's place, Ted at Coldwater Pond. And we got a really late frost in May. Everything was like leafed out, and then all the leaves dropped. And I was like, oh no. Still to be determined if there's even like a twig that is going to leaf out this year, but we're not really that hopeful. So is it the case that like if you get one of those, that's where, those Japanese maples might just like falter?
Well, late polar vortexes can be tricky. I mean, we get late frost here. Typically, they're going to be fine. Like, I give them a light liquid fertilizer to try to push out buds if I know something's particularly hurt. Our biggest damages come when you have it back to back. So, like, a lot of times maples will re-leaf, but it's that second time re-leafing. Like last year, we got really cold in April. Yeah. And we got really cold again in late April. So that's the tricky part, is that secondary once they're back again.
Yeah. We had one relief, but the leaves were about this big, and they were supposed to be like this big.
Right.
And so it kind of reliefed, but it like barely had any energy left in it. And I was like,
Juvenile growth can be weird. Like it exaggerates it sometimes. It's looking for all the energy it can get, I guess.
Yeah. So I mean, that was one of the things I feel like an early learning, because I really wasn't familiar as very growing Japanese maples. I was in Brooklyn, and then we kind of inherited this land, so to speak, and there was Japanese maples planted in it. And so it kind of forced me out of my comfort zone, and I'm like, okay, because I know more of my native plants, I guess, and I was like, let me learn a bit more about these things.
Cool. So
it allowed me to appreciate it in a way that I don't think I would have appreciated if they weren't already had been planted in the landscape.
I found them to be extremely addictive plants. So once you get a few, you can't stop there. Like it's
that's like plants in general.
Right.
Japanese maple is also just a catch-all for a lot of different types of species.
It's a great question. So there's a lot of things that go into Japanese maples. So obviously species that are native to Japan. That can include trident maples, that can include truncatums, that can include, a lot of things that we don't think of in section palmata.
Sometimes the vine maples out in Pacific Northwest are kind of like put into the Japanese maple category
too. So it grafts into section palmata, and most of the time things in section palmata kind of get lumped in.
Okay.
Now a lot of the cool ones, truthfully, are probably hybrids. Like that's how you get the red bark, that's how you get the witch's broom, the dwarfer characteristics. There's a lot of, obviously a lot of farms out there in Oregon, so they're likely hybridizing to get some more unique traits going on in there, like even naturally. So likely some of those may be hybrids with a Japanese maple, but yeah, that one kind of gets lumped in just because of its proximity to palmatum.
Right. So now is the viability between the hybrids? Because like I said, we got on our land. I have found little Japanese maples growing, and so they must be able to hybridize with one another.
Oh yeah, they can cross-pollinate. It's interesting. Seeds, you get more seeds in a bad year, so your stress trees sure probably have more seeds.
Yeah, that's what happened.
Stress trees tend to have a little bit more seed. Yeah. It can be conditional to that year. We've had a poor seed here the last 2 years just because of our late frost. If you get all the right flowers out, you get a lot of seed. So I mean, it can be conditional to that season individually. And a lot of people will tell you they specifically hybridize this palmatum with this palmatum. The truth is a lot of potluck. So if you go through enough cool seeds, you'll find cool things. Like we go through a ton of seed here on Makawa Yetsubusa, which is like a dense, nice dwarf. And we find that just going through, a plethora of things gives us some variability. Whether we're trying to specifically create hybrids or not, sometimes just going through a lot's the answer there, and then you get neat things.
Right, and I mean the pollen is probably it's wind pollinated to a certain extent, because even our like red maples are somewhat wind pollinated.
Well, bees can certainly be a factor.
Right.
So bee pollination is one of the main ways, but Japanese maples, it really depends on the type of maple. So there's a lot of things there in that section. It can get super tricky with maples from Japan, because you got great plants that are monoecious and dioecious. You got all kinds of weird stuff going on. A lot of things get lumped into Japanese maples like snake barks.
Yeah.
So they're native to Japan.
And we have also native snake bark here, but although the snake bark is a little different.
Yeah.
In Japan, it's actually, I think, a more beautiful snake bark, but we have it in the Northeast, like a snake bark maple as well. But
you'll find native Pennsylvaticum out here in the mountains of western North Carolina as well, and they're beautiful plants. We like to mimic how we see those growing. They're always kind of leaned up against something, or they're tucked against another tree, or they're on a bank with really good drainage. So I often recommend, if you're growing snake barks, to kind of mimic that a little bit, at least in our area, and it seems to give us great success.
Are there any specific cultivars, varieties that you specialize in, or that you personally like, or do you just kind of span the...
So we definitely try to be at the forefront for introducing new things. I like when a tree has extra traits. So we've grafted one that we call Acer olivieranum. It's likely a hybrid with Shirasawatum, hot blonde, and it's a yellow olivieranum. It's actually a Chinese maple hybridized with a Japanese maple, but it makes it more heat tolerant for zone 9 folks. So it can handle a ton of sun. It's a bright yellow that's just super durable for the high heat areas. We do a ton of things like that just because it's got a little extra push for people in hotter places. So
how do you like to see your Japanese maples planted? Because there's so many things you could do. You could bonsai it, you could put it in a pot, you could have it in like a Japanese style garden. It could be a feature tree. It's like you have a Japanese maple for anybody's kind of disposition, I guess. But what do you like to see?
So I'm obviously a nut for maples here. So I tend to do mass planting. So I end up planting, I can show you my parents' yard, which is not far from here, but I end up planting a lot of trees in a small proximity to each other that are all Japanese maples. Structurally, a lot out of leaf. So right now, things are just starting to leaf out. But what you get in the spring is so many interesting colors, because you can plant, oranges next to reds, next to greens, so it all kind of plays off the eye a little bit. And you can kind of create just some really neat palettes where you have a dwarf maple next to another maple, so they're not overcrowding long term. You've given them more space because you've mixed dwarves in there. And then the fall color can play off each other a ton too, so we'll kind of plan, this is gonna be orange, this is gonna be more of a yellow, let's put these two near each other so that when fall hits, there's even another change.
Yeah, and that's something I think a lot of folks who are unfamiliar with Japanese maples may not understand too, is that in the spring, yeah, you were mentioning the fall color could be pretty dramatic, but the spring colors, they're not all green necessarily. Yeah. In the spring, like our maples would be like, oh, everything is like green or some shade of green. But the ones in the spring they could be bright red.
Oh my gosh,
they could
so
be
many cool colors.
Yellow. You know, the lazy leaf I was talking to you about like off camera is like orange, you know, so there's all sorts of things that I think could be really unique because it's almost like you're having a fall in the spring.
Yeah, there's yellows, reds, oranges. There's many trees where the spring foliage is like the flower. So like Shinda Sojo, it's like that pink spring color is almost like the flower of the tree. It almost mimics the fall color too. And so there's a lot of them that really show out in that springtime. There's really every color you can imagine except blue. The blue ones are fake. We used to get a lot of calls about the blue ones because people will sell the fake blue seeds. Yeah. And I always show them something like Purple Ghost. Yeah. It's like a crazy color of like magenta-y purple. And I'm like, this isn't photoshopped. This is though. So there can be some crazy shades in maples. Blue, not so much. Stick to the conifers for the blue. But there's some outstanding shades of purples, yellows, oranges, deep reds, variegated of all kinds. I've
never seen the blue one actually that you refer to, but what's interesting as far as lighting goes, you'd mentioned variegates and also like I shared the red ones. What I noticed about our red ones, I think we have like a Temukayama? Yeah, so it's like kind of this cascading one that in the sun, it's bright red, but if you go into the lower leaves, you have kind of green lower leaves. So it feels like it needs the sun in order to kind of bring out that kind of blood red color. And then the variegates, does it need to be as intense of sun? Do you need to be protecting some of those variegates because they have like the whitish kind of pinkish
So
leaves?
As a general rule, the more pink or white you have in a tree, the more late day shade you need. And we get by with a lot here in Western North Carolina. You probably do too in your sun exposure. I have several things that have a lot of pink and white on them that we do have in a sunny exposure. But in general, the more pink and white there are in the tree, and yellow. That's why the hot blonde's kind of cool because it can handle the yellow.
Interesting.
Summer gold can handle the yellow, but most of your bright yellows, pink, and whites are going to need more protection from the hotter parts of the day.
Right, okay, so like that, like hot western sun or overhead, you want to have it a little bit more protected.
Yeah.
Okay, those are really good tips. You're gonna show me some of the colder hardy ones that go into like a zone 3, 4.
Yeah, let's check some out.
Yeah. All right, so we passed this off to Tim, and Tim is the brother here, the other brother, the younger brother.
Yeah, it's awesome to be able to work with your family. My brother is one of my best friends, and it's just, you know, a blessing that we can work fantastic together, and we're so different. I'm very analytical, Matt's more social, so everything just works perfectly together.
That works awesome. So that you brought in some of the cold hardy ones that you have grafted
here.
This
is part of a series of trees we're developing. These are probably 5 of probably 50 that we have in evaluation, but I brought some just to show some of the different variation.
And these are all really dissectum types.
Well, this one here particularly, this is one that we've got a working name on it of falling snowflakes. It's an Acer pseudosubuldianum, and it's got that weeping cascading umbrella habit. Yeah. But it's Acer pseudosubuldianum hybrid, likely with the Acer palmatum.
Huh. It's so like literally right up to the petiole. It's like dissected.
Yeah, and it's got some decent spring flush colors. The fall colors on the pseudosubuldianums are some of the best.
Why is that?
Well, I actually think that often some Japanese maples turn fall color based on the temperature changing. Other maples, and pseudosubuldianums and japonicums are part of this, they often turn fall color based on the length of the day. And so as it gets shorter every year, even though the weather is inconsistent, you have a consistent fall color because the sun is always consistent.
Oh, that makes total sense. That's interesting.
Yeah, and so, for instance, this is just a green one. We had a jagged leaf. We called it jagged ice. It was very interesting. One that was real interesting to me that was this one here. This is one that we put the name of Arctic Glow. And you can't really tell much about the foliage right now, but it's actually, when it's out of leaf, that this, during the winter, is a bright yellow green. So it has exceptional bark interest during the winter months.
Kind of reminds me of like maybe like a cornice, like the cornice buds yellow or whatever, where it gets a nice yellow bark.
Exactly, and that's what we were going for, is one of the first, most coral bark varieties are good to zone 6. But if we can get some pseudosubuldianum that start to show some of those traits, then we can start working with that and then develop something that might be good in zone 5 or zone 4.
Right, so it'd be a little hardier. Now, tell me, if it has a green trunk or stem like this, does this mean that it has chlorophyll in it?
It does, and it actually often means that the actual, on Acer palmatum, it typically means that the bark is actually thinner, and that's one of the reasons they're not as cold tolerant.
I see.
But with Acer subultianum being more cold tolerant, we're going to be trialing it and seeing, how cold tolerant this can be.
Yeah, great.
This one just had some nice purple tipping to it. Working name on this one was Blizzard. So in the early spring, it sort of cupped downward. But this one is one of our many red uprights. And this one is particularly called Black Ice. And it's sort of changing what people think of Acer subultianum, because when people normally think of the species, the reason it's not popular is it doesn't have the color that the Japanese maples have.
Right, and I think like the standard in the industry, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, has been like the blood good. Like blood good has been like a big Japanese maple standard, and they like want to go off of that color, you know?
Oh, definitely. And being from New York, you might know that blood good was the guy's last name. It had nothing to do with the color.
I had no idea.
And it was actually a New York based nursery that then moved to New Jersey, moved to Pennsylvania, and then came back to New York. And they were one of the first businesses to really introduce some of the red, upright Japanese maples, and the name just stuck. I mean, people see the name Bloodgood and they think of the Japanese maple.
Yeah.
And so we're hoping that we can take that same trait and then be able to push it down into zone 4 for people who weren't able to appreciate, those red upright Japanese maples.
That's fantastic. I mean, now how are you going to test whether it's a zone 4? Because you're not in a zone 4. So how would you test it?
What we'll be doing is we'll be grafting these.
Yeah.
One we'll be grafting them onto palmatum. We'll also be grafting them onto subultianum, sending them down to zone 4. And then once they get zone 4 tested, then we'll start testing zone 3.
That sounds great. Awesome.
And some other people try to use a cooler test where they try to see how much the tree will freeze dry. We prefer actually putting them out into the environment, seeing how they perform, and then selecting from there.
Got it.
Yeah.
Can you show us some other varieties that you have, just to give like...
Oh, you're at the right time of the season.
Yeah, am I? I thought I was going to be too early.
Well, what it is, in our cold frames, things leaf out a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
And this is one of my favorite times because you get the spring flush. And the spring flush can really show a lot of differences, a lot of excitement.
And you can already see here, like, just take a span of this, like we're here in March, and you could see that there are quite a range of colors in the springtime.
It really is. I mean, you start walking through here, and that's when you start to see all the different colors. Some trees aren't in leaf quite yet, and then some trees are just beginning to leaf. This is one of our most popular selections. It's called Makawi Etsubusa.
Now this looks like a real dwarf. Does it
It is. It's 3 to 4 feet in height.
Okay.
In 10 years. So it's 3 to 4 feet in height and width.
I can't tell what the growth structure is going to be. Is it going to like start to? Is it upright, or is it?
It looks like a little miniature bonsai.
Okay.
So it will literally just be very much bones-esque.
Yeah.
With tightly layering shingling habit. And we watered in here last night, so it's got some nice droopy leaves, but these will be perfectly flat. And this was the very first maple of the year with the North American Maple Society. When Matt was president of the North American Maple Society, we actually implemented the Maple of the Year program. And if this one could win it again, it would win it every year.
Yeah, it looks like it's shingled, like almost scale-like, the way that the leaves sit on top of one another.
It does, and it's a very fun tree. We grow thousands of seedlings of these. It's actually our top-selling tree.
And you say seedlings, so, because a lot of times these have to be grafted in order to maintain.
Well, these are grafted cultivars in Makawi Etsubusa.
Okay.
A seedling wouldn't have the same qualities. Exactly, but we love this one so much, so why not find ones that are similar, that have a different quality?
If you have the space, then you might as well.
We go through thousands of these. At our Buckholtz farm, we've got probably 6,000 to 7,000 Makawi Etsubusa seedlings, looking to see if we can find something that's truly unique and special enough. And likely, if we go through 6,000, 7,000, we might find one if we're lucky. But you may not find one that's as good as what's already out there. Now,
when you say you're doing seedlings, and we talked to your brother, and he's like, sometimes you can't control for what you're crossing it with, right? So are you just like letting it cross with whatever, or are you out there like finger fucking,
I think the best thing to do is to go out there and just let nature do its thing, let God pollinate it, and then pull those plants out there, and then grab those, as one of our employees, Corbin, says, those lottery tickets.
Yeah.
And see if you win.
Yeah.
And get those seedlings, put them in the ground, and see what pops up.
Right.
And you never know what you're going to find. I mean, there's always something fun and interesting in every batch.
Now, are you trimming any of these trees? Or are you kind of just letting them grow as you are? Like, what's your suggestions on kind of like some of these things that might have like one big stem coming up? Would you just kind of let it grow, or how would you suggest on trimming?
That's an excellent question. When it comes to a Japanese maple, they've got such great natural form. 1 gallons typically don't need to be trimmed. I often will put a tree in the ground, let it get established, and then as that tree starts to put on a lot of different growth, then deciding what, based on the characteristic that cultivar has, pruning it accordingly. And the very best thing to do whenever you're getting a Japanese maple, I mean, we've got 1,000 varieties, is choose the right one for the right spot. I mean, you don't want to choose a bloodgood and try to turn it into a little dwarf Rhode Island red.
Yeah.
You don't want to try turning that little ball shape.
Yeah.
You're always going to be fighting it. But, so we often say, learn what the plant does. They can go through photos on our website. We try to put as many photos as we can of trees, even full-grown trees on our website. See what shape it's naturally going to have. And then once it's established in the landscape, then you can start getting an idea of how you want to train and shape it.
Got it. Take us through, maybe let's go through like a dozen others just so people could get a sense of like what the differences are.
I've got some favorites, and I see one back here.
Okay, sure.
And so I don't know if you've ever seen any of our YouTube channel, but I'm a big fan of the color yellow.
Okay.
And
Yellow's very popular at the moment.
and first off, this is Katsura. This is a yellow upright. It leaves out, but it's one of the first harbingers of spring. It leaves out, and it just brightens up the landscape.
And what color does it get in the fall? Does it?
Oranges and reds.
Okay, so it's kind of this chartreusey yellow in the beginning, and then it goes to orange to red.
And it's kind of yellow-green during the summer, so it's a little bit brighter than your typical green upright. Brightens up the landscape. But one of the ones that I'm walking to is this one.
Now this looks weeping, like a kind of more pendulous.
It is. This is Acer palmatum Golden Falls. And this has those same Katsura-like vibes. But this one has that heavily cascading habit. Great for containers. It's actually a selection that was introduced by Talon Buchholz. We've actually got a similar one that we were introducing during the same time called Dragon Master.
Which one's better?
They're both phenomenal.
Yeah.
The difference is this one looks more like Katsura. There's a cultivar out there called Orange Dream, and ours looks more like a weeping version of Orange Dream.
I see.
Very similar though, they're both yellows, and you know, there can be room for 2 fantastic yellow weeping trees. There's plenty of red uprights. But this is a tree that you can stake up and then let it cascade down like a fountain.
Yeah.
You can actually put this out and just let it sort of creep across the ground and use it as a Japanese maple ground cover, essentially. I've seen that actually in Connecticut done in just a phenomenal way.
Now, do you have to kind of like, would it again depend on the structure, or are you trying to train it down in order to be able to weep and be a ground cover, so to speak?
This one will weep heavily. It's one of the most cascading selections.
Interesting.
So it will really hook and go straight down to the ground.
Got it.
And that makes it fun to play with because you know exactly what it's going to do. That's why some people will put these in a hanging basket and then let them hang down off of a hanging basket.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, interesting.
And it's a new fun thing that a lot of people are doing with Japanese maples.
Well, how big does the root ball need to be? I mean, because a hanging basket, you know, sometimes I would say a hanging basket wouldn't be that heavy, but...
Well, a Japanese maple grows fantastic containers. They've got a shallow, non-invasive root system, which makes them a phenomenal container plant in the landscape, but also for a hanging basket, that it makes it ideal for that. And it's kind of fun. We were in Japan and we actually even saw some people growing them topsy-turvy.
That's weird, like upside down?
And it was this similar style, and they would grow straight down because they're so strict weeping. And then after a while, they would take the tree, flip it over, and then it would start cascading down the other way, and it was like every branch was perfectly staked.
Oh, wow.
So there's so many fun things you can do with this style plant. It's a fun tree, and this one being yellow, you can plant it next to your reds, contrast well. You can plant it next to some blue conifers. If you put it in the landscape, everything's green. The yellow brings out every shade of green.
Yeah.
And that's why I personally love yellow, is because it makes you appreciate everything in the landscape so much more.
And even in a dark area, I would imagine it kind of brightens it up as well if you had a really shady area.
That's for sure. And with sunlight, it just shines and glows even more.
Thank you for showing that. I mean, with 1,500 or so varieties, like, you know, you just can't like know. I wouldn't be able to know them all. I don't know how you keep them straight in your head.
Now, this is one I think that you said that you may have gotten from us at some point.
Yes, is this the Rhode Island Red?
This is Rhode Island Red.
Yeah, it's also one of my favorite chickens, so I was really attracted to the name as well.
Rhode Island Red is just a small, compact. Everybody always looks for a blood-good Japanese maple, but blood-good may not fit in everybody's landscape. I mean, a blood-good is a big, tall tree. You know, it grows slowly, about 14 inches of growth per year, but Rhode Island Red fits in so many people's landscapes so much easier. It just stays dense, compact, makes that perfect little round ball almost every time. Selection from Rhode Island Nursery. And for me, this is a quintessential red dwarf that more people need to be growing. Yeah, especially if you're only doing it in like a small garden, or if you have like an eighth of an acre or something, but you want the kind of Japanese look. Like you said, the bloodgood could get almost too big and overpowering for that kind of size of a plot. So this would be a perfect. So that was one that I had like looked for. And I just, you could search for like dwarf varieties and specifically find that one that would be nice for your landscape. But there's 1,000 varieties of Japanese maple, so you can talk all day on so many amazing plants. One of the plants that I really like is, we've got this right here. It's just starting to leaf out in here. This is a variety called Sunny. Now it leaves out, and as this tree actually comes in full leaf, it actually turns orange right after. And then it's a bright yellow for the rest of the summer after that. Now, what is the use of the carotenoids or anthocyanins? What is the use of that color in these Japanese maples so early on in the season? Do you have any idea? Because like our leaves will turn like yellows and oranges and everything as it's getting prepared. Like the chlorophyll starts to leave during the cold season, but this is like the chlorophyll is being masked early in the season. I'm not 100% sure. Some people think that it's like a sunscreen. Yeah, right. That makes sense. And helping protect the young juvenile foliage. But that's something left more to the botanical experts than me. I love the Japanese maples and all the variations that are out there. I mean, everywhere you turn around, there's another Japanese maple that is different and unique in some shape or form. And this one here, for instance, is an Acer Shurasaunum hybrid. And you being in a zone 5 might realize, well, in zone 5, when you have those polar vortexes, the Acer Shurasaunum hybrids actually do fairly well during those polar vortexes. They're not as pushing and as hard of growth, and there's a little more cold tolerant than your typical Acer palmatum. And so there's a lot of things being done for trying to push zones. Yeah. And these are the nuances that I think I would love to know, because you almost like don't want to invest in something that, if that polar vortex comes through, and it's not protected by the house or something, or a stone wall, that you would want to get something that's a bit hardier so that you don't like invest, because a lot of these are also investment plants as well. They are. I mean, a Japanese maple, as it grows and matures, it gains and adds value to the house. You often see a realtor put on the house listing, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, large Japanese maple in the front yard. It's like the cycad, like in South Africa or whatever. Yeah, it really is. 3 bedrooms, like 2 baths, and a Japanese maple. And a lot of our Acer oliveranum hybrids aren't leafing out yet, because we've actually created some that laid out a little bit that leaf out a little bit later. But we've actually got some that can push zones and handle full sun in zone 9, and maybe even some in zone 10 as yellows that can handle full sun. Yeah. And so we've got a lot of fun, interesting things. We're trying to go not just both the cold tolerant side, but also towards the heat tolerance as well. Right, because I mean, you just want to get a wide swath of people, and oftentimes the people want to grow the plant that they can't have. So if you could kind of stretch those zone boundaries a little bit more. But I would say that like people in zone 9, if you just give it some kind of sun protection in the afternoon or during the hottest part of the day, and you have some good shade, or you plant it in the shade of some other trees, you could probably get away with it. They definitely can. I mean, that's the case in most zone 9s. There may be some zone 9s in Florida that may not get the chilling aspects that Acer palmatum may need, because Japanese maples have to go through so many days of dormancy. And so they may live the first year, the second year. So the zone 9 bees down in Florida, they might struggle a little bit with. But most of the other places in the United States, zone 9, Japanese maples and protection from the hot afternoon sun should do decently well. And we have some maples that are more heat tolerant than others. And we have things on our website that talking about, these are our most heat tolerant trees if you're in those hotter zone 9s.
Now, what is the species name for the vine maple in Portland or
Acer
in Oregon?
circinatum.
Okay, and that's the ones that like have a little bit more cold tolerance, perhaps. Can you hybridize those with some of the Japanese maples easily?
I'm not so sure that Acer circinatum has more of the cold tolerance.
Okay.
There are some good traits that it has. Acer circinatum can be very multi-stemming. They can be very shrub-like. In some areas, people say that they can handle wetter conditions than Japanese maples. There's phenomenal fall colors on Acer circinatum. Our biggest problem with Acer circinatum is it doesn't like the humidity in most of the other rest of the country.
I see.
And so hybrids really have to be trialed with Acer circinatum to make sure that they can thrive and do well for a lot of other people.
Got it.
There's always a
A
catch-22.
trade-off, yeah. So is there anything else in this house that you would like to show us that you think would be an interesting highlight for folks?
Yeah, we walked past one fun one back here.
Sure.
This is a classic type. This is one that's just coming back from winter, and the bark's not as intense right now. This is one called Winter Red. We also have Sangukaku, which is a coral bark selection.
That's right, yeah. I think I've seen that one where it has like, the really beautiful bark and the petioles are even like reddish pink or something, right?
Yeah, and these are good in zones down to zone 6 on the coral barks outside. Some people can grow them sometimes in zone 5, but it's always pushing it. But definitely a fun tree that can give you winter interest because you get that the red twigging on a Japanese maple. Some great yellow fall color as well. It's one of the best yellow fall colors on any of the Japanese maples.
You and your yellow.
I didn't realize I talked about so many yellows. At least I threw a Rhode Island red in there.
Yeah, you did. It's only because I brought it up though. I just want to thank you for your time and showing us some of your passion for this particular plant, obviously, and also the fact that you have expanded your empire in a way so that more people can enjoy these beautiful plants as well.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
More videos are around the bend, including more informative interviews and some long overdue spring projects at Flock. So if you're interested in what we're doing, be sure to subscribe here and help on our journey. We'll see you in the next video.